20 years ago, we got a major grant to look at the role of technology in economic development, and it was called Smart Communities. And we found early on that you can't have smart communities without smart people. And now we're entering this new era where everybody is talking about creativity and innovation. It's sad to say this, but they don't see the connection between the arts and creativity and innovation as much as they should. But we know a lot more about the brain than we ever did before. And we know that those who have been exposed to the arts, schooled in the arts, or experienced what's called art integration, and hopefully we'll talk more about that, because the Mingei is involved in one of those programs of art integration, working with the schools. Those fortunate young people learn skills that aren't taught anywhere else. They're certainly not taught in their schools, which appeals mostly to the left brain. And we now know that if we're to succeed, if America, the great experiment, is to continue, if creativity and freedom and democracy will survive, it is precisely because we find a way to nurture the whole brain, both sides. And we badly need the arts back into the schools, broadly, or there will not be an age of creativity and innovation, simply put.
I don't mean to pick on you, but I did. I did note in your history that your early government jobs were for two Republican administrations, Nixon and Ford.
That's unfair.
And I'm talking to you now as an unbiased educator who weighs the options, but you do have the political experience and the political knowledge. And frequently, when there's budget cutting, it seems to me like the Republican side is the side that pushes more for the arts to get 86th. If you think of pressure to downsize or eliminate the National Endowment, pressure to downsize or eliminate funding for public radio, it's not obviously entirely a Republican-Democrat thing, but what can we do to change that situation? It doesn't seem like there's progress there in terms of arts funding from government. It seems like it's going in the opposite direction.
There is some progress. There's some good news. Dana Gioia, who many of you may remember, was the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts about 4 years ago. He said, we cannot compete in this new world economy through labor or materials only on brain power, and we need desperately to ground people in pleasure, beauty, and wonder, or we will not have a creative and innovative economy. Now, he's not the only one. There are a lot of people that are saying the right things, but between the good things that they're saying, there's very little action. We do see budgets cut. We see the debate over No Child Left Behind. We see STEAM, which is a wonderful idea. I mean, it was a concern that we needed another Sputnik moment, and we needed to emphasize science, technology, engineering, and math. Well, sadly, we're talking about another Sputnik moment, and it scares me to death because there's no A in the effort. And yet, we don't know, as I mentioned earlier, we know that the arts will produce the kind of people the workplace will demand, needs. This is a matter, Harvey White, who former president of Qualcomm, has said this is a national emergency. And we've all got to get behind it.
I'd like to thank you. I want to take this down to the grassroots level with Christine to completely flip it from the macro to the micro. I was lucky enough to visit your school probably 20-some years ago and saw a great collection of professional volunteers like Jim, working with lay volunteers, working with families, working with kids, and building this school from scratch. Interesting to me, you come from an engineering background academically. From what I know, you earned a master's in engineering at Stanford. Concurrent with that, you spent a lot of time doing ballet with Joffrey Ballet and other companies. So it seems as if at one point you had an engineering or science career in mind. Talk about those two sides of your life and how you ended up going the way you went.
Well, since James Hubbell designed the school, I don't know if you're familiar with his form of architecture, the organic architecture. It was a really good thing I was an engineer.
A big challenge there.
In fact, when I first went to Mexico, I thought I was leaving engineering and going into social work. And then I discovered I was doing civil engineering. Actually, when I started working in Mexico, there were a lot of problems with working in an area that was not recognized. It was not a legal entity. Nobody had the right to own the property they were living on. So there was a lot of fighting in the community, and we were looking for 2 years. We were having these political debates about whether we were going to expand the little tiny kindergarten into a bigger piece of property. And when we finally got a tentative permission, I thought, well, we have to incorporate some elements that are going to bring other levels of society into the project and pique their interest. And I started asking people, what is something that transcends class barriers? And Raul Romero said, music. All different classes of a society can appreciate music. I don't know if it transcends cultural barriers, but it does transcend class barriers. And that transformed into architecture. And we made the decision, well, we're going to make this building so beautiful that everyone will be in love with it, and it will have municipal, state, national, international attention and interest. And we went through 12 architects and found James, and he was willing to help us as a volunteer for 20 years. So as it did turn out, we built the kindergarten, and it was a very, very beautiful, and it is a very beautiful building. I invite you all to come visit, and it won a big architecture award. But more importantly, it brought peace to the community and a lot of confidence in the school. So it solved a local political problem. In fact, for churches to be accepted in the medieval times, they had to be beautiful. They started making beautiful churches. And so when we first built the school, everyone thought it was a church, because in our society, buildings that are beautiful are typically churches. They don't invest that much into other buildings. But I had problems, you know, when I told my board of directors I was having James Hubbell as the architect. They basically resigned because they thought it was an extravagance. And it turned out not to be an extravagance, and that's a big issue that we're dealing with here, where people think of the arts as a privilege instead of a birthright. And even one of my biggest donors, you know, gave me a whole argument again about making these curvilinear roofs and how people needed to eat and the basics of education, and then he proudly showed me his own art collection. So we had a lot of adventures.
I could see a real connection in feel and sensibility between the movement in ballet, when you imagine a ballet, and the movement in a Hubbell building like your building, which is very graceful, curves, organic forms. Ballet became, from what I understand, somewhat central to your curriculum there.
This is true. Since I studied ballet professionally, I knew what it had a great appreciation for ballet. And we had the opportunity with a 1-year grant, which we stretched to 8 years, to bring 2 ballet teachers from Russia to teach ballet. Before, children go through a process of development where when they're in 3rd grade, their mind wants to connect with their muscles, and I was noticing that they were breaking lots of windows and hanging from lots of doors and jumping off 2nd-story buildings. I was like driving down the street and watching the students jump off the 2nd-story roof. And so I said, well, we need to expand the program. And as it was, we started with physical education, then ballet folklorico, and then we were able to introduce the classical ballet. And every year at Halloween time, we have a costume party, and entertainment with a clown or magician, and one year the clown says to me, "Your students are so well behaved." And I said, "Are we really talking about the same children?" And they said, "Well, you have to understand, I go to other schools, and relative to the other schools, your students are really calm." And it's true, because they have a sense of their body and an appreciation and more of an attention span. And you were talking about justifying arts education because it helps math and it helps other areas, but there's a big debate in that area, because arts education is great for arts education, and we should value that as the spatial and the music part of our brain as two sections of our brain, as we were discussing the whole brain, separate intelligences. When they consider the 8 different intelligences, those are separate intelligences. And it seems like, what would happen if we never allowed somebody to learn how to speak a language as one of the intelligences? And we're literally crippling our children.
Thank you. Jung-Ho Pak has been around the arts, music, arts education, music education, working with musicians ranging from world-renowned classical players down to kids that are just getting rolling. In your own experience, what kinds of connections do you see between kids that come up through the ranks of orchestra, youth orchestra, and go through high school and college and embark on an academic and post-academic career that integrates sciences and the arts?
Well, it's a chicken and the egg kind of question. It's like, are smart kids drawn to music, or does music make them smarter? And I don't have an answer to that. After you know, not being one of the smarter musicians, I don't really, can't intuit what music has done. But having taught at UC Berkeley and worked with other you know, serious academic institutions, it's very clear that, you know, why Einstein was a violinist, or Schweitzer, or, you know, all these great scientists who are drawn. There's a Doctor Symphony, I think, in both Los Angeles, and I think there's a Doctor Symphony in New York as well. There's no Lawyer Symphony that I'm aware of, however, but there is a Doctor Symphony. And so I think that I think there is a clear correlation, but you know, when we're talking about arts and education, I have to say that it's something that I live and breathe with this every day of my life, about the disconnect between arts and because we tend to think of arts and education kind of this, like this hallowed thing that every child deserves, but we don't. I don't think take a really hard look at whether or not that education is really relevant, or whether the arts in general are relevant. Every kid wants to grow up and become a baseball player, basketball player, astronaut, or whatever, because they have the benefit of visibility and a commercial access to it. I think the arts, if it's going to survive in the schools, has to survive in the community, and it starts with the parents. You know, you can bring a horse to water, you can teach a child to play a violin, but if the parents don't want to drive them there or pay for the lesson, then you're lost. So I think part of this discussion, in some tangential way, has to put the onus back onto the professional artists, the museums, the ballet companies, the opera companies, the symphonies, the theaters, whether or not we are truly making the case for the arts. Because, you know, when you put, and I've seen them, my daughter participates in them, but when you put a 5th grade school, a class of playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, that's wonderful. But those parents, and even those children, don't necessarily go to the arts after that experience. One of my great analogies, and I'll just take a second to do this, is if you go to any great youth orchestra in this country, like the New York Youth Symphony, Chicago Youth Symphony, Dallas, and you look in the string section in particular, violin and cello, what ethnic group do you see populate? Asians. And yet, when you go to the concerts, what proportion of those audiences are Asian? So, very few, if you've never been to a symphony concert recently, very few Asians. Where are all those Asians who went on to be lawyers and scientists and doing great things? Why is playing music not connecting with them as enjoying music as an audience member? And this is something that I deal with as an Asian, you know, an Asian, of trying to figure out why this disconnect. And it's easy to tell when Asians don't show up. But it's perhaps a little bit more difficult to find out all those other people who participate in the arts and don't go to museums or don't go to symphonies. And so I think I'm just sort of opening this up for discussion a little bit more, is that when we talk about making the case for arts and education, as you might make a case to teach Esperanto, for example, or Latin in the schools, you can make a case for it, but it doesn't necessarily mean people want it. And so this is a very kind of a midlife crisis kind of question that I think the arts need to address.
Do you think that the arts in general are less valued in our country than they are in some other countries? I'm thinking of France, where they frequently have presidents who seem very hip to the arts. I'm thinking of South America, where I know that famous novelists have been elected to public office, and I can't imagine those things happening here.
Absolutely. There are countries where they have artists and poets and musicians on their currency. We have presidents. They have artists and writers and thinkers. But I would say no. In other parts of the country, parts of the world, I would say that the arts are suffering equally. And even in Europe, the cradle of Western civilization, the cradle of Beethoven and Mozart and Rossini and, and Shakespeare. As we probably know, in England, funding, there's a real debate in England whether or not the arts should continue to be funded through government support. The Royal Opera House, the Royal Ballet, there's a real change as they're discussing even whether they should have monarchy. But what I've seen is that in America and in Europe, in particular, Western civilization art, what we consider classical art, is on a decline, a very rapid decline. It's because of the Americanization or the Madonnizification, if you will, of art across the world. It's becoming one global unit. But interestingly, where Western art is picking up is in Asia. Again, here's that strange dichotomy. In China, in particular, they're building concert halls faster than Starbucks. And it's because they don't see Western art as an intrinsic value, but rather as a commercial value. And not even in terms of ticket sales, but in terms of it represents sophistication, it represents accomplishment, refinery. But their concert halls are not being filled, but they're producing music students at an alarming rate. I mean, just hundreds of thousands of millions of music students who can play extraordinarily well. But just because you can teach a child to play violin doesn't mean they have, just as you teach a business person, it doesn't mean they think with imagination. That's what they're kind of trying to look toward us for inspiration.
But the Chinese clearly, at least at some level, recognize that the marriage of art and science is important to their future success.
And the question,
I mean, I've been invited to speak more in China about the importance of art than I have in this country.
And the question is, 10 years from now, what will that art look like? Will it look like Beethoven and Mozart, or will it look like some new hybrid of a Nintendo Wii and a PlayStation kind of expression, or iPad expression, as we're seeing? Is it Chinese classical art? Interestingly, I don't think Chinese classical opera per se is that popular as much as, let's say, Justin Timberlake.
I don't know about what the arts training is yielding in terms of art, qua art for art's sake, but they clearly have a goal to be an innovation economy in 20 years. And that's the reason, by the way, that they're focused on marrying art and science, and they're teaching art in the schools. I want to shift gears just a little bit because the Obama administration has a committee, Art and Humanities Committee, that spent 2 years looking at what we need to do to create an innovation economy. And clearly, when they released a report a few months ago, they said, we've got to find a way to get art back into the schools. And the LA Times reporter said, well, I'm not sure if smart people gravitate to music or it's the other way around. Seriously. Even though we now know, and there's kind of evidence everywhere. The Dana Foundation, for example, at Johns Hopkins, recently did a major study on the connection between music and math. And they found out that people who play musical instruments are really good at math. And that when you play a musical instrument, which is essentially a right brain activity, it ignites the neural firing pins in the left and enhances math and science comprehension.
Absolutely.
I mean, we need to make some of those connections ourselves and make the arguments that your kids will not get a job. You know, they're not going to get a job. We're in a downward spiral as a country, and we're going to have more and more of our young people living in our basements or garages. It's bad. It's really that bad.
You're still making the argument that it's good to be a musician so you can be a good mathematician.
As opposed to being an artist
As
for
opposed to being a
art's sake,
musician.
a career in the arts.
Yes, you can have a career in the arts.
Jim, we started off with the title for this panel, Uniting Matter and Spirit, Creating a Whole Student. The idea of a whole student isn't something that I've heard very often. What is your idea of what a whole student would look like?
Well, I think one of the interesting things, I had a friend years and years ago who taught at, he didn't teach, he worked at Salk Institute, and he was telling me that a lot of the innovations going on in science were when disciplines crossed over. And I kind of think it's one of the rules of our time is that when we take down barriers between things, good things happen. When we put walls up, bad things happen. And I think that we need to stop thinking of art and science as two different things. And the left and even the, you know, I've met a bunch of people that are neuroscientists and they use the term left and brain. I don't find it works that way. I think your mind jumps back and forth continually. You can hardly tell where one has started and the other one's. You know, you get an idea and you check it. You get an idea and you check it. Is it going to fall down? Can you do it? Will it cause? You know, so I just think if we could get the dialogue not only in the arts and sciences, but across the board of how do we connect, how do we begin to think of not as me, but as how that we're all woven into this thing, and the mind is all woven into it.
We have several generations here. All of us went through our schooling, our schooling in our college at different times in different eras. And Jim goes back the farthest and has lived through several generations. I wonder if you would share a little bit about how various disciplines came together or didn't come together when you were young and what you've observed about that relationship over the years.
Boy, I wasn't, I'm not typical. I really, if I got a C.
We know that.
If I got a C in school, it was a big deal. You know, and well, like one of the things I was thinking, I was rather restless when I was a kid, and I used to hitchhike all over. I mean, I hitchhiked to California and Connecticut back 3 times. And I was thinking, well, what did you learn? And I think I learned being alone, sitting there with my thumb out for a half a day waiting for somebody to pick you up. And I think that was good. I think stopping and being quiet, you know, if kids could work on computers, could spend the equal time pulling weeds or painting a picture or something, it would give the brain a time to absorb what it is they're learning about.
Oh, John, you've probably thought about this more than anyone, and I wonder if there's too much pressure placed on test scores and structure in the classroom, and not any thought or time given to the kind of experience Jim is talking about. Go out and experience something for a couple hours with no particular test score or goal in mind.
You know, there's a guy, he's British but he came to this country because he thought he could make more money, I guess, named Sir Ken Robinson, who says, is a wonderful speech he gave at TED, the conference on technology and design. He says, we're all born creative, and then it's squeezed out of us, and by the time we're 8, it's gone. And his comment really was directed at the school system, because we have so many silos. Even the Chronicle of Higher Education has talked about maybe the silos inhibit learning. Well, today, we still have all these silos, biology, German, journalism, you name it, because they don't mean a thing, really. The kids who major, and we always ask them, what's your major, They don't, it doesn't matter what they're majoring in, because they're not going to find a job in that field. I mean, even the kids who study art and design, about 3% will be great artists or designers. But what about the rest of them? We have got to eliminate a lot of the silos and stop teaching to the test. I want to say one thing about another regulation or survey that's done called PISA. How many of you heard of the PISA? It's an international test that's given to 15-year-olds every 3 years. And we rank way down, like 26 or 27. Shanghai is number 1, right? They herded kids into the schools in Shanghai, and they drummed the test into them, and they did well. And our Secretary of Education, our former Assistant Secretary of Education, both administrations have said, oh, it's all over for us. It's all over for us. Why are we teaching to the test? What do we really care about the PISA tests? What do we care about No Child Left Behind tests? What do we care about all these standardized measurements which don't measure creativity or innovation? We've simply got to find a better way to eliminate the silos and start looking for those sparks of genius, which every kid has.
Well, thinking about 2 different approaches to classroom education with young people reminds me of reading about Christine's own experience with a daughter that I believe attended your arts-oriented school in Tijuana and transferred to a stateside junior high school, I think it was. So I wonder what...
4 daughters that did that.
4 daughters. So what would they say to you about the difference and the different pressures, or what did you observe in them with 2, what I would think to be very different learning environments?
Before I answer your question, I'd like to make a few comments about some other questions. When he said, well, the Obama administration is trying to figure out how can they get arts back into the school, all they have to do is give money. They're actually spending $11 billion to renovate the San Ysidro boarding crossing. $11 billion, excuse me. So they could redirect that funding to some arts education.
Just knock off a little hunk of it.
Also, you made the mention about the Republicans. Actually, I have to give the Republicans a point in favor. They support the charter school system, and also money to choose which school you would like to attend. And I think that promotes, a lot of the charter schools have strong arts programs, and I'd like to see more support for the charter schools. In fact, I'd love for my school to be a charter school in Mexico. As for the difference in the educational systems between the Colegio La Esperanza and the United States, I noticed my daughters commented that they thought that our students were more socially advanced, that they had more confidence in themselves. And this kind of relates a little bit to James's comment about going out on your own. I was noticing that the Finnish schools are the #1 schools in the world in Finland. And they typically tell their students, okay, go out and do a 2-hour cross-country ski trip by yourself with no supervision and come back. And what they try to do is incorporate art in the program to teach the kids confidence and trust, because trust is the big factor. And I think what our whole culture does is try to inculcate fear. So the arts education, gives people confidence, and they know that there's more than one solution to a problem, and they can, they can exercise their creativity.
Jung-Ho, you spend a lot of time, as we mentioned, around a lot of young, talented musicians, and I wonder whether the burden for the arts is falling largely to the parents these days. I know in my own school district in North County, where my daughters attended public school, they're 20 and 23 now, but they went all the way through the public schools, and if not for the parents and generous contributions of funding, time, transportation, there wouldn't have been much in the way of band, orchestra, and other arts programs. So what are you seeing? Are the parents having to pick up the project where maybe the other institutions of our society are dropping it?
I think for sure, across the country, of course, everyone knows that the arts are first to be cut because it's tougher to quantify, the success rate of the graduates and what impact the arts had upon them. But I think they would probably be able to argue for the arts the best, the successful ones. Does anyone know if Steve Jobs ever participated in a band or choir or the arts?
Yes, I read that he did.
Yeah.
Have a band.
What did he do?
He played a guitar, I believe.
Well, see, there you go. But unfortunately, there was no SAT for the guitar. That he was one of the most imaginative people on the planet and visionary and
productive.
And productive, yeah, absolutely. Who I think probably wanted people. His vision was to not put a computer in everyone's hand, but to unleash their creativity in the end.
Well, the thing about Jobs that I'm a shameless Apple addict, but aside from the functional aspects of Macs and iPhones and iPods, the design is what I think is the real bonus, and a lot of the attraction is what the things look like, how simple they are, how easy they are to use, what they look like and feel like in your hand. They're very tactile, and apparently one of the reasons that Jobs was so interested in design was that he went to Reed College in Oregon for, I think, a quarter or two. That was the only place he would go, one of the most expensive, talked his parents into it, dropped out, then was kind of a vagabond, and he somehow became interested in graphic design, took a graphic design course, and from there on was obsessed with typology, the size and look of type, the design and proportions of objects, and so it seems that kind of exposure really does make a huge difference.
And we were talking about teaching to the test, and you were asking me the question about the disconnection between school support versus parent support. Not only do I feel like we teach to the test, but I think the arts have also suffered from this as well in education, that teaching a child to smile while they're playing an instrument is not attested, unfortunately, and that's perhaps the greatest symbol of whether arts really matters to a human being, whether they're just happy. And I think in the pursuit for grades, and I've talked to many arts teachers who have to fulfill this goal, this state requirement, But in the end, sometimes the child just doesn't really enjoy what they're doing. It's just they're glad they're not in science class. And so I think I would dare say teaching to the test. I would even perhaps take a close look at the arts in general and whether or not we're teaching children to love life. And because in the end, you talk about being quiet and discovering yourself. That's really what the arts are about. Whether you're listening to it or whether you're participating, it's about finding your own humanity and connecting to another person, sharing it in the same space. Because Lord help us if Netflix or a webcast is the way that we experience art in the future.
I'm thinking of structured arts and arts teaching, going back to kindergarten with my kids, with very strict, limited boundaries as to what was the arts. And I think back to my daughters as kindergartners, and an arts class was you give the child a piece of paper with an outline of a horse, and you give them 3 crayons and tell them to color that in, and that's your art requirement. So maybe part of the issue is not only the lack of arts in the classroom, but what I think is a pretty narrow approach to what the arts are. Another example is they talked about music, the history of music, only fleetingly in my daughter's grammar school classes, and barely mentioned anybody from jazz or African American music, or any music that didn't really have a couple or 3 of the great heroic figures from, say, classical music or great American composers. So the curriculum seems to be lacking, the approach to teaching.
Dirk, I want to say one thing, because I know we're running out of time here. I think we're all apologetic for the arts. Richard Deasy, who was for many years the president of the Arts Education Partnership, made the comment, he said, math and science, they have equations, they have formulas. I mean, they're really manly, but the arts are kind of feminine. We don't really care about the arts. They're not important. It's really a frill, isn't it? Well, we know what arts training can do for young people, and we shouldn't be apologetic about the role of the arts. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with an editor of Business Week 10 years ago. They put on the cover, "We've entered the creative age." See, we have to think about creativity and innovation. And a year later, they changed it. And I happen to know one of the editors who was dining with us. His son was looking at schools in San Diego. But I said, "Why did you change that?" He said, "Well, our readers didn't think we were talking about them." They're business people. So we coined the term innovation, and we dropped the term creativity. This happens all too often. I did a piece for the Huffington Post recently, and I went to the AEP website to download everything that's been done about art integration. We mentioned that term. We haven't talked a lot about it. The AEP said there are a lot of schools that are trying this, but they don't call it art integration because they don't like that term. It turns people off. We've got to stop that. We've got to stop apologizing for the role of arts in our society, in our economic systems as well.
One thing I think that's interesting is how one defines an artist, and people have a lot of different ideas. Some people will say, hey, if you're a publicity guy publicizing the arts, then you're an artist. You're doing creative work on behalf of the arts. Other people would say, no, you're only an artist if you're a painter or a sculptor or a musician or a composer. And categories or names like that seem to put a limitation on creativity. So, Jim, what do you think about the word artist? And do you have a conception of what being an artist means?
I think you try to be a human first. I don't really like the definitions. I think one of them, if you think about evolution, if you're a plant or some kind of amoeba, if the weather changes and the climate changes or something, you change physically. I think what happens with the human being is that things change very quickly. You have a plague, you have a war, you have overpopulation, atomic bomb. You need to adapt emotionally first. And I think it's one of the roles of the artist, and it's only one of them, is to suffer with the time. To say, I can't imagine a world that's going to disintegrate itself with a bomb. And in a sense, what they have to do is change the rhythm, the pattern of what the culture's doing, and that's their job is to say, and they do it for themselves. They don't do it for humanity. They make something that a new way of thinking about sound that allows them to live in a world that's not working. That thing sometimes helps the rest of the world. And I think it also, without that thing, you can't do the intellectual thing. You have to make the emotional jump into a different world in order to do it, to make it something that works intellectually.
You go back, I hate to keep harping on your age, but you go back, obviously, to a time before computers, internet, all these...
I'm still in that age.
I'm not supposed to confess to that. But I wonder if, there is some skepticism among old schoolers about the value of technology, social networking, kids spending a ton of time on Facebook, or kids that just lock themselves up for 8 hours playing video games. On the other hand, this communications network that's global now has the power to help revolutions in Middle East countries, for example, and it also has the power to take the arts and spread them globally at little or no cost. So is that something that you see a lot of hope and value in?
I think it's thrilling what's going on with technology. I think it's not thrilling if it's not in balance. If it is only, everything that we do, no matter how great we think it is, has a negative side to it. Everything we do which is negative has a, and I think it's kind of the artist's role to find that balance where we don't destroy ourselves with the good or with the bad, that we find a path in between it.
Hearing you speak reminds me of why, I just thought a little while ago, why classical music? Why put a piece of sculpted wood in your hand with some taut metal and scrape against it when you have an iPad or a Wii controller and make sound yourself? But I think it does have a purpose, putting toe shoes and going through the rosin and at the bar and the sweat, because I think the society is going through kind of like a spiritual slow food movement. You know what I mean? Yeah. Where you're going back to the ground, eating organically, tasting what a real tomato tastes like, and I think that's what the performing arts do. You have to memorize your lines. You don't have a teleprompter. You have to hit your mark. You have to work and practice, and that connects you with what life is really about. And I think sometimes it's a little bit like the Matrix, where everything is done for us, and we're so disconnected from eating and breathing and smelling and feeling and loving that we're becoming these animatronics.
Well, I'd like to add, at the La Esperanza schools, every year we have 2 major festivals, and so they have to prepare dances and music and booths and presentations. The one in the fall, which is coming up this Sunday, or maybe a rain date the following Sunday, focuses on the different states of Mexico, and the one in the spring focuses on international countries. And it's just like he said, it focuses the children. It's like it's the #1 educational experience that they have. And in addition to that, it's an educational experience for the whole community. And I'm including the San Diego community. And I invite everyone to know the rich music and color and dance that I never anticipated when I went to Mexico and discovered. So,
if you think back to societies that you read about in histories of different countries and different people and different cultures, there was a time when there was no such word as art, and what we might call art now was just a part of daily life. You did your productive business side of things, if you will, which was figuring out how to shelter yourself and how to put food on the table and how to have clothes, but integrated with that, and I don't think with any particular rigorous structure was song and dance. Women would sing while they did the work, preparing meals. There was dance ritual that was integral to the day. There was prayer or meditation that was integral to the day. And I wonder if we've lost that kind of holistic kind of life where the arts are just a part of life. Creativity is a part of life. It's not like a separate thing that you have to add in.
Me? Well, I have another theory. I think that we've been going through a period that was similar to when our country was formed, and we were in this idealistic time that we could create an ideal world. And then the French Revolution came, and it sort of pushed us into realizing that we weren't in control, and we had the Romantic Revival, and we had Beethoven and Byron and all those people. And I think that we've kind of overdone the control thing, and that we need to begin to celebrate mystery and the unknown and the things that we can't, and realize that the kind of the wonder of being alive is that we don't know things. And as soon as it's almost true, as soon as you know something, you've killed it. And I tell friends of mine that are scientists, and I don't know if they agree with me, but science is usually about finding truth. Not all scientists, but artists is really about making mysteries. You know, what you try to do is to make something like a tree that you can, any tree, every culture, every person can interpret it a different way. And it can grow from one century to another, to all different kinds of things. And that's what you really try to do, is to make something that's incomprehensible and make life exciting and wonderful.
Among John's many capacities in the last 20 years or so has been your significant role on the faculty at San Diego State University, along with all the other work that you've done, writing books, position papers on the arts in society, the arts in education, the arts in building a healthy economy. And I wonder, I know you've spoken a number of times on campus, you've spoken to classes, to students. So on the one hand, you have this idealistic view of the value of the arts. I wonder how your message compares with the reality of what you see on a significant college campus every day.
Well, I don't know how to answer that because you're really asking several questions. I did spend a lot of time in Washington, and I didn't like the politics of doing business. After a while, it wears thin. Every 4 years, you start over again. You know, you don't want anything to happen, particularly if you're a lobbyist, because you're paid to make sure that nothing happens. So nothing happens to your industry. And then I was in business with CBS, and the bottom line and the quarter-to-quarter mentality wore me down. So I thought, boy, this is great being an academic, because there's no politics here. Wrong. Wrong. Yeah. There's a lot of politics, and the politics is really, you start out with the university, which has two faces. There's the administration, there's the president and the deans, and we all hear from them because they want money from us, right? And they put the face of the university out. And then there's the faculty, and they don't like deans, and they don't like presidents. They get tenure, and they're very insular, frankly. For a long time, they wouldn't let me near the undergraduates, by the way. But I overcame. You know, with time, all things are possible. What I teach the course that they tell me to teach, right? It says globalization and the media technologies. Forget what it says. If you come to my class, you learn about culture, you learn about creativity, you learn about the world, because that's what I teach. But I don't tell anybody that. Probably, it'll get out now, everything's out. You do what you have to do to make sure that you give kids what you can, the best perspective on the real world. And I have worked, in a sense, art into my classes, all my classes. This is my excuse to really talk about art integration. What art integration is teaching through the arts. It's teaching all kinds of disciplines through the arts. It's getting the young people to use all of their faculties to learn. They sing, they dance. Take High Tech High, which is right across the street here. I did a piece on High Tech High, and I interviewed I went to the school, I went up and talked to some of the kids in the hallways, and I finally talked to Larry Rosenstock, who's the founder. And I said, wow, this is an art school in disguise. He said, please don't say that. He said, we teach math and science. This is High Tech High. It's an art school in disguise. There is no silos. There's no art or math or physics per se. There's experiential-based learning that takes place. He came up with a wonderful name for it. And he's having great success with High Tech High. I mean, you all know that they got $10 million from the Gates Foundation to start 10 more schools. We've got to eliminate the silos, and what I try to do when I am in class is get people involved. You know, I mean, Howard Gardner wrote Multiple Intelligence, what, 30 years ago? Do you know Howard Gardner? He's the one who says, you know, there's kinetic, there's literal, there's musical, there's all kinds of intelligence.
Psychological.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the educators have never gravitated to this, you know, because it just makes it harder to test, of course. But the truth is we all learn differently. And why don't we get the students more involved? If you come to my class, you do get involved. I ask them to sing. I had a guy gave a final paper all to a guitar. He sang his final project. He got an A. But, you know, that's what we have to do. We've got to eliminate those silos. I do it to the extent I can. I'm here tonight to try and get more supporters, obviously.
It's interesting because on the one hand, a guy like you is concerned with the arts, passionate about the arts. On the other hand, the reality of moving the arts forward in education is about money and politics. So really what you're saying is one of the keys is stealth promotion. You know, you put one label on it that kind of passes muster, but really it's whatever you want to make it out in the streets where they don't really even look.
That is an admission against interest. I would wish it weren't that way. But
it really is. I know that from trying to get people to concerts
at
UCSD where you have to put a familiar, you know, you put the familiar there when half of it is really going to be the unfamiliar, but you just want to get them there.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I don't have to report to anyone like that. I'm a bit of a despot. I have more boys in ballet than any institution in the world. Just because I believe that ballet is terrific and the best thing for everybody.
Hey, I studied ballet. I mean, I had a mother who dragged me. She said, you're going to take this course. You're going to take ballet. So I took ballet. You're going to learn tap. Okay, I took tap. You're going to play a musical instrument. I was never any good. But I did a couple of music instruments, and I studied for a couple of years at the Art Institute of Chicago because she said, it's a Saturday. I said, Mom, it's a Saturday. She said, you'll do it.
What about that?
More parents have to do that, but that's not the answer,
you guys are going to see a heck of a performance when we get done talking, by the way. This is going to be something. I'm trying to think what I'm going to throw in there, but the stealth marketing thing has a number of benefits, and it's something that I know that Jung-Ho has thought about in terms of getting people to your concerts and not defining a concert program narrowly by this is a classical concert and this is a jazz concert. Instead, you consciously program your concerts to show connections, and how if you're into jazz, look, you're going to like classical. I'll show you why. If you like old school classical, you're going to really dig jazz, and I'll show you why. But it's kind of stealth marketing to get them in the sense that Orchestra Nova is kind of identified as classical.
It's not ghettoizing the arts. It's not ghettoizing classical music. And just as you're saying, you know, connecting politics with mathematics, with art, it's all about life. And I think one of the things about classical music that we have to do very, very quickly, very quickly, because you probably have heard some of the major orchestras in the country are near collapse. Philadelphia Orchestra, the great Philadelphia Orchestra, filed for bankruptcy 3 months ago. So it is time to fling open, like Great Expectations, fling open the curtains and the windows and let the fresh air in, because well, this weekend I've got a concert where we're comparing Baroque music to jazz. And so not only are we doing Vivaldi and doing some jazz standards in the second half, and explaining Baroque music and jazz, because many people are deathly afraid of both, but also to tie in the Beatles as well. So we're going to do some Vivaldi, and then we're going to do Help in the style of Vivaldi. And so people can understand. But, you know, I mean, this is stealth, because I'm putting in the cod liver oil with the ice cream
I guess
cone.
we shouldn't call it cod liver oil.
Well, because the reality is that 98% of the public considers fine art cod liver oil. It's like, you know, get your teeth cleaned once a year, but don't want to go back in between. And if you can just ignite the original passion that Stravinsky or Bach or whoever had when they first created the piece, that's the thing that we've done. We've lost the historical context of all this great art. We don't understand the smells. We don't understand the politics. We don't understand the disease and mortality. We've hermetically sort of freeze-dried everything and put it on a classical concert stage with tuxedos, and we expect people to understand the context. And it's impossible. It's like having the Beatles 1,000 years from now performed in white tie and tails. It just wasn't that way. So I think we call it stealth. But what I actually think about it is just actually restoring, rehydrating the arts to its original sense of relevance and urgency.
Christine, I'm curious because most of your work in education is in one of the economically poorest neighborhoods that one could find in the Southern California, Mexico.
Even though they come from this Mexican culture that does have a history of dance and music and painting and incredible creativity, not to mention the cuisine, which is an art in itself, they don't necessarily appreciate the arts. So that's why it's good to incorporate it into the program. Like we have 12 hours a week extra of special classes. So if they're in the school, they have to take the classes. And then sometimes I have to blackmail the parents into having their kids perform in the festivals, because they don't want to pay for the costumes, which are like $12 a piece. And so I have all kinds of, what would you call it, arm wrestling techniques.
Here's another
which I shamelessly employ.
Possibly naive question from the mind of Dirk, but in one sense I could see where a kid that grows up in an underprivileged family with less structure and has to fend for his or herself and discover the world on his own might have a more creative experience than a child from a very wealthy family that sends the kid to a very structured, high-end private school.
I feel sorry for some of the students in some of those extremely expensive private schools in Mexico. That's a whole other subject unto itself, honestly. I think they're incredibly rigid and structured, and they have a whole system of punishments, too.
Well, but it kind of speaks to what money can or can't do.
I don't know if I understand that.
Well, maybe it speaks to what misdirected money can't do, because obviously there's resources there, to send your child to a very expensive school. There are resources to build the school, to hire the teachers that probably make decent salaries compared to your average public school teacher, and yet that experience can be very, very limiting. Whereas an experience at your school might be a better artistic and creative experience.
I have to say that the students do appreciate the school, and they love the school, and they love their experiences, and sometimes this comes out in the most surprising moments. Like when we were debating with the local congresswoman about concrete for the street, and some of the neighbors came up and complained about the school, and at the same time some of our former students came forward and started telling how much they love participating in the Lion King and the Little Prince, and and completely won the Congress lady over.
Well, you're kind of doing
first-hand, testimony.
You're in a good position of having almost an arts immersion program for the community, because your school is so hard against this I'm putting out bad vibes or something, this very underprivileged neighborhood that the people that live by your school don't have to go anywhere to experience the creativity. It's right there in the middle of them.
That's absolutely true. Once they're in the school, especially in the school program, they experience it. And then when we have, special programs in the summer, design build, and we also have Saturday free classes, free instrumental music and free ballet classes, so we also get those people involved.
I think it's a great time for the arts because of the financial difficulties that we have. We have to get to brass tacks. We can't have flash bombs and super LED monitors behind us because we can't afford it. And so what you're seeing is, even thanks to technology, you see flash mob artistic events. They cost nothing. It's absolutely free. It just takes human will.
For people that don't know what a flash mob is, tell them.
Oh, it's just briefly, it's where people it's like, when they have these flash mob, actually they have destructive flash mobs as well, that go and destroy things. But you can also do random acts of beauty as well. You can say, okay, we're going to meet in this mall at this time, and everyone, we're going to dance this piece, or we're going to play this piece together. We're going to play Beethoven Symphony No. 5, and at the train station at this, and it's just so much.
But you show up unannounced. That's the flash aspect.
Right. Exactly, and so what it just tells me is that people are hungry to participate in the arts. They want to connect with each other through any means possible, and so I think that this economic downturn is perhaps going to be the golden age, the rebirth of the arts.
Well, I think anytime we have a downturn, it's potentially depressing when you look at something collapsing, and the arts in themselves are uplifting, and so they also remind you of your common humanity and the community in itself. And like I said, for us, incorporating beauty and having this immensely gorgeous, beautiful building just inspired the whole community. They loved it, and they all said to me, "Oh, Christine, when you do the elementary school on top of the hill, it's going to be the same architectural style, right?" And I thought, my goodness, we have a whole community of architecture critics now. They're all aficionados. They love this organic architecture. I haven't had any complaints about that. And another thing is, whenever we do any kind of film or theatrical production, I generally have 100% participation and positive participation. But you can't say for every activity.
I think that what we tend to do is project what we think is going to happen. So we see all of this negative stuff and we project it. Basically, we don't know what's going to happen. It might be much worse, and it might not be bad at all. It might be great. And I think that I knew a guy that worked a lot in China years ago, and he told me he was in this garden with an old Chinese man and asked him about a fountain. The Chinese man never told him anything about the fountain. He told him everything about what was around the fountain. So what we do is we have problems and we focus on the problem. Sometimes the problem's a door. Sometimes it's not there. Sometimes you can go around it. And it's really, one of the artist's role is to pass through the problem and to make it something that works. So it's an exciting period. I mean, we're really lucky to live at this time. It's much more interesting than a time when we know what's going to happen.
The rise of, generally to probably oversimplify, but the rise of online learning at the cost of personal interaction.
I don't think people will do what they're told to do.
What do you mean?
I think people are going to want to get together. I remember in the 60s, when you did a restaurant, what you were doing is trying to get people as close together as you could. And people will still, I mean, I've thought for a long time the reason for cities is really to bump into people. And the more you can, and the kind of office buildings that we do where you're separate don't make sense anymore. But the museums and the concerts and the bars and where you bump in and argue and disagree, and that's what cities are for, and that's people still want to do that. They don't all want to sit home. And
that's kind of goes back to my, this is a whole other discussion, but my personal opinion that the best jazz musicians were the ones that learned in the school of the clubs and the school of the streets, and they really haven't been equaled by musicians that have been academically trained in more recent times, but that's a whole other debate. I think you had a comment.
Well, I was going to comment on something that's happening here in San Diego called IDEA, which stands for Innovation, Education, Design, IDEA. Information.
Department
design,
of Energy.
No, the arts, well, it's essentially a real estate development, but it's built around nurturing design and professionals and artists. It's an art district, and it has funding, some limited funding to start 6 to 8 square blocks, but the whole project is like 100 blocks. And the idea is it's that we need to use architecture, broadly defined, to redefine community. And we need to eliminate those tall buildings, if you will. I love the fellow who wrote The Geography of Nowhere. I can't remember his name, but he was talking about the World's Fair in 1939 or something, which was run by General Motors. And it was tall skyscrapers separated by miles of asphalt. And they had their way. The automobile dominated. We now are starting to rethink the role of those cities to creating cities that are livable, walkable, that are incubators of creativity, and ideas is one of them. I think that this is a really good time because the hearse is at the back door. We're facing a jobless recovery. Don't you love that term? Jobless recovery. We have got to do something strange in our schools, but also in our communities, and redesigning the communities so they become not only the centers of commerce and the crucibles of civilization, but the incubators of creativity, so that we can have people rubbing shoulders once again with other people and thinking of great thoughts.
And can I just follow up on the apps question? I mean, the reality is that it's here to stay, and that the egalitarian approach to education is going to change drastically. And like iTunes, you might be able someday to take a Harvard law class for 99 cents. You know, and it isn't going to go away. So where do the performing arts lie in all that? And I believe, again, it's tying back in with creating a more human experience at those events. For dancers and musicians to go out into the audience and hold people's hand and give them a hug, and bring them on stage, and a more communal experience that they can't get virtually.
There are so many ways that we have to reinvent not just education, but everything we do. And you can be involved in supporting public art, supporting museums, supporting symphony, get out there and don't be ashamed of your support and your interest, and let people know, let your neighbor know too. Get involved in everything, because we need everything in order to nurture attract and retain the kind of creative and innovative people that are going to make America, you know, a city on the hill again.
And if I can also say, in good words, is that to also be truthful. Be truthful with an artist. If you don't like something, tell them. You know, I mean, sometimes as artists, we tend to think we're serving up dinner and, you know, I don't care, you're going to eat it, you know. Really tell the artist what you think. I loved it, I hated it, and have a dialogue with the artist to improve them. But it's also your money, and it's your time, and you have every right to shape the experience.
Yeah, I got to say, from living in Encinitas, go out there and speak up at the Arts Commission and City Council meetings, or you'll end up with something like our surfer sculpture in Cardiff that seems to be only good for seasonal costumes.
Well, this actually relates to the other woman's question about how do you make arts relevant in the classroom? And I think it has nothing to do with money, and it has everything to do with the teacher. And if the teacher is in the classroom teaching dance, theater, music, with the understanding that they're to not only enlighten the kid, but also to create an anarchist. That's what I try to do with my orchestras. I luckily get to conduct at Interlock in Michigan, which is a big music festival. But talk about subversive. Really, I preach anarchy. I said, don't grow up to be a musician who just follows, you know, what everyone tells you what your job should be. Because if you do that, you're just going to be another lemming going off the cliff into bankruptcy. You know, it wasn't that long since San Diego experienced that. And so I would say that we really have to train a new set of teachers, arts teachers, to be warriors. You know, a friend of mine, and we joke, you know the tiger moms? You know, it's like, you know, they're panda moms, you know, who kind of laissez-faire. I think sometimes we as artists, you talk about having a kind of a poor self-esteem as artists. We need to be warriors. We need to be entrepreneurs and marketers in the classroom as well as on the stage, and we need to be willing to fight for our program, market it smartly, and inspire the kids to go out and change the world through the arts.
Yes. You got my vote. We got to get you up there in office soon. Jim, do you want to close us out here? We're up against the end of our time here.
Well, in Julian, they have some ladies started a really good garden for the kids, and it's really amazing, and they do all kinds of things to bring the community in. One of the things, they have a very good, where you keep, you put all the vegetables and the old sandwiches, compost thing. The junior high and the high school doesn't have hardly any. One of the boys that went to junior high, his comment was, they made me throw the banana peel in the garbage can. I think what might be interesting is to start a movement of adopt an art teacher. Find an art teacher that really is good, help her.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here. It's been privileged to hang out and have this conversation. The main thing I miss about doing the radio program is having access to creative, solid, amazing minds and getting to ask you whatever question I want to. So that's very cool. Let's thank our panelists.